The ancient watcher. The sun hung low on the horizon, a blistering ember smeared across a bruised sky. Somewhere in the valley below, a faint wisp of smoke curled upward, barely visible through the thick haze of pine and cedar that coated the mountainside. High above it all, nestled in the jagged cliffs of the Wirm spine, a dragon lay sprawled in repose. Ethereal scales the color of storm-tossed seas shimmered faintly in the twilight, catching the last vestiges of sunlight as the creature's chest rose and fell in slow, rhythmic cadence. Orur was old, even by draconic standards. His wings bore scars from battles fought centuries ago, and his once lustrous horns were now dulled at the tips, weathered by time. Yet his golden eyes remained sharp, piercing the expanse of the valley below with a gaze that saw far more than mere mortals could perceive. This was a land both ancient and young, its hills and rivers shaped by millennia of erosion, yet still teeming with the fragile chaos of human life. It was a contradiction Orur had grown to tolerate, if not entirely understand. He had been here for decades now, a self-imposed exile from the world of men and their ceaseless conflicts. The Wirm spine was a sanctuary, untouched, unclaimed, and vast enough for a creature of his size to vanish entirely from mortal sight. It was here that Orur had come to rest, to contemplate, and to escape the burdens of a world that no longer seemed to have a place for beings like him. But even in his isolation, the tendrils of humanity's dramas reached him. Today it came not as a whisper of war or a plea for aid, but as a faint, acrid scent carried on the wind. Burning wood, and something far darker. Orur lifted his head, his nostrils flaring. Beneath the scent of smoke was the unmistakable tang of fear, sharp and bitter, a scent that stirred instincts he thought long buried. He rose slowly, his massive frame casting a long shadow over the rocky ledge as he unfurled his wings and stretched. The air was thick with anticipation, as if the land itself held its breath. Far below, in the clearing where the forest gave way to an open plain, a group of humans had gathered. Orur's keen eyes picked out the scene with ease. Men and women, their faces obscured by the flickering light of torches, stood in a tight semicircle. At the center of their gathering was a single, small figure. A child. No more than 11 years of age. Her hands were bound, her head bowed, and her trembling form was barely visible beneath the cascade of her dark hair. Orur's gaze sharpened, the golden light in his eyes narrowing to slits. The girl's terror was palpable. Even from this distance, he could taste it on the wind, mingling with the acrid bitterness of smoke and the metallic tang of blood. This was no mere gathering. It was a ritual. And rituals in the human world rarely ended well for their victims. The defiant song. The dragon shifted his weight, his talons scraping against stone. He could hear faint voices now, carried upward by the currents of air. They were indistinct, but their tone was unmistakable: anger, desperation, and something else. Something dark and primal. The humans had the look of villagers, their clothes simple and worn, their faces etched with lines of hardship. Yet there was no mistaking the weapons they carried: rusted swords, pitchforks, and heavy wooden clubs. Tools of labor turned to instruments of violence. Orur's tail flicked, a low growl rumbling in his throat. He had seen this before, the mob's lust for vengeance, the scapegoating of the innocent. Humanity, for all its ingenuity and resilience, had a terrible tendency to devour its own when fear took hold. And here, in this desolate corner of the world, it seemed that cycle was repeating itself. He lowered his head, his eyes narrowing as he studied the girl. She was young, painfully so. Her small frame was dwarfed by the crude stake she was tied to. Her clothes were simple but dirted, and her bare feet were caked with mud. Yet there was a defiance in her posture. A quiet strength that belied her fear. Even as the crowd jeered and brandished their weapons, she did not cry out. Instead, she lifted her head, her dark eyes scanning the crowd with an intensity that seemed almost otherworldly. Orur felt a flicker of something stir within him, an ember of emotion he had not felt in centuries. It was not pity, nor was it anger. It was something far older, something buried deep within the core of his being. He had lived through countless ages, witnessed the rise and fall of empires, and yet this single moment, this fragile, defiant child standing alone against a sea of hatred, felt more significant than any he could recall. The wind shifted again, and with it came the faint, melodic sound of the girl's voice. She was singing, her words soft and lilting, a stark contrast to the harsh shouts of the mob. It was a song Orur did not recognize, its melody haunting and mournful, yet filled with an unyielding sense of hope. The sound pierced through the noise, rising above the chaos like a beacon of light in the darkness. "Witch," someone screamed from the crowd. "She sings her curses even now." But the girl continued, her voice growing stronger despite the flames that had begun to lick at the base of the stake. Her song was not a curse, Orur could sense that much. It was something else entirely. A prayer, perhaps. Or a farewell. The crowd's leader, a burly man with wild eyes and a scarred face, stepped forward with a burning torch. "Enough of your dark magic, girl. Face your judgment in silence." And then, as if in response to her song, the first torch was thrown. Flames erupted at the base of the stake, licking hungrily at the dry wood. The girl's song faltered, her voice breaking as the heat surged around her. The crowd roared, their cries a cacophony of rage and triumph. Yet even as the fire climbed higher, the girl did not scream. She stood silent, her eyes locked on the horizon, as if she were searching for something, or someone. High above, Orur rose to his full height, his wings unfurling with a sound like rolling thunder. The oath broken. The air around Orur shimmered with heat as his scales caught the dying light, casting brilliant reflections across the mountainside. He had sworn an oath long ago, to remain apart from the affairs of men, to let their world unfold as it would without his interference. But oaths, like the hearts that made them, could be broken. With a single, powerful leap, the dragon launched himself into the sky. The wind roared in his ears as he descended toward the valley, his massive form cutting through the twilight like a falling star. Below, the mob's cries faltered as they turned their faces upward, their torches casting long shadows across the clearing. As Orur plunged toward the earth, a single thought burned brightly in his mind: not tonight. The dragon's descent was both beautiful and terrifying. Orur moved through the air with a grace that belied his massive size, each beat of his wings sending tremors through the atmosphere. Below, the mob scattered like ants beneath the shadow of an approaching storm. Torches fell to the ground, their flames snuffed out by the wind stirred by Orur's approach. Cries of fear replaced the jeers of anger, and in that moment, the balance of power shifted entirely. The girl at the stake, her face pale and streaked with soot, watched the sky with wide, unblinking eyes. Her song had long since ceased, but the memory of its haunting melody lingered in the air. She did not flinch as the dragon landed, the earth quaking beneath the force of his impact. Dust and ash swirled around him, obscuring his massive form for a heartbeat before the wind swept it away. Orur's eyes burned like molten gold as he surveyed the scene. His gaze settled on the child. Her gaze met his, and for an instant, an unspoken understanding passed between them. She was not afraid, not of him, at least. And in her defiance, Orur saw a glimmer of something he had not encountered in centuries, a kindred spirit. The crowd, however, was another matter. They stood frozen, torn between fight and flight, their primitive weapons trembling in their hands. One man, braver or perhaps more foolish than the others, stepped forward. His face was a mask of fury, his knuckles white as they gripped a rusted sword. "Demon," the man bellowed, his voice cracking with desperation. "You will not take her. She's cursed, a blight on our village." Orur's head tilted slightly, his golden eyes narrowing. The word demon was not new to him. Humanity had long sought to name what they could not understand. But it was the accusation that followed, the declaration of blame and guilt, that stirred a deep, simmering anger within him. The dragon's voice, when it came, was like distant thunder rolling across the mountains. "And what curse," he rumbled, each word measured and deliberate, "has this child brought upon you?" The man faltered, his sword wavering. Around him, the crowd exchanged nervous glances. It was clear they had not expected the dragon to speak, much less question their actions. The crops, another villager stammered, a woman with hollow cheeks and desperate eyes. They've failed 3 seasons running. The well water turned bitter. Livestock have been dying. It started when she came to us, when her parents died and left her in our care. Orur's gaze swept over the assembled villagers, taking in their gaunt faces, their threadbare clothes, their haunted expressions. These were people pushed to the brink by hardship, seeking someone, anyone, to blame for their misfortunes. So you would burn a child, the dragon said, his voice dropping to a low, dangerous rumble, rather than face the simple truth that life is hard, and sometimes there is no one to blame. The price of fear. The silence that followed was deafening. The villagers cowered beneath Orur's withering gaze, their weapons now seeming pitifully inadequate against the ancient creature before them. The flames around the stake had begun to die down, leaving only wisps of smoke curling into the darkening sky. The girl, still bound but no longer in immediate danger, watched the exchange with quiet intensity. There was something in her eyes that Orur recognized, the look of someone who had faced death and found peace with it. It was a look he had seen in the eyes of warriors and kings, but never in one so young. Please, the village leader stepped forward again, his sword now lowered but still in his grip. You don't understand. Strange things have happened since she arrived. Children speaking in tongues during their sleep. Animals acting wrong. The very air feels cursed when she's near. Orur's massive head swung toward the man, and for a moment, the dragon's expression was almost pitying. Tell me, he said softly, what is the girl's name? The question seemed to catch the villagers off guard. They glanced at each other uncertainly. We call her the Cursed One, the woman from before admitted reluctantly. Her name, Orur repeated, his voice taking on an edge that made several villagers step back. An older man, bent with age and leaning heavily on a walking stick, shuffled forward. Lyanna, he said quietly. Her name was Lyanna. Before all this started. Lyanna. The dragon spoke the name with a reverence that surprised the gathered crowd. He turned his great head toward the girl, who lifted her chin slightly at the sound of her own name, perhaps the first time she had heard it spoken without hatred in months. Tell me, Lyanna, Orur said, his voice gentling, do you know why they fear you? The girl's voice was hoarse from smoke and fear, but when she spoke, her words were clear. Because I'm different. Because I dream of things before they happen. Because I can feel the pain of the dying animals. She paused, her dark eyes never leaving the dragon's golden ones. Because they need someone to blame. A collective gasp went up from the crowd. Several villagers made warding signs with their hands, and more than one weapon was raised. You see, the leader shouted triumphantly. She admits to her witchcraft. She brings omens of death and doom. But Orur was already moving. With surprising gentleness for such a massive creature, he used one of his great claws to slice through the ropes binding Lyanna to the stake. She stumbled forward, catching herself against his scaled forearm, her small hand barely spanning the width of a single scale. What you call witchcraft, the dragon rumbled, I call gift. What you call curse, I call sight. This child sees the world as it truly is, not as you wish it to be. He looked up at the assembled villagers, his golden eyes reflecting the dying light of their scattered torches. You speak of failed crops and bitter water, of dying livestock and strange dreams. But tell me, did these troubles truly begin with her arrival? Or did they begin with the great drought 3 summers past? With the plague that swept through the northern territories? With the raiders who poisoned your wells before moving on? The silence stretched uncomfortably long. Finally, the old man who had spoken Lyanna's name nodded slowly. The troubles, they did begin before. But they got worse after. After you found someone convenient to blame, Orur finished. After you decided it was easier to sacrifice an innocent child than to face the hard work of rebuilding what was lost. The dragon's wings spread slightly, casting the entire clearing in shadow. You want to know the truth about curses? I will show you one. The curse of memory. Orur's eyes blazed as he gazed upon the terrified villagers. The ancient dragon drew himself up to his full, imposing height, and when he spoke, his voice carried the weight of centuries. The curse I place upon you is not one of fire or famine, he declared, his words echoing across the valley. It is the curse of memory. You will remember this night. You will remember the fear in a child's eyes as you prepared to burn her alive. You will remember the songs she sang while you sharpened your hatred. And you will remember that when given the choice between compassion and cruelty, you chose cruelty. The villagers began to back away, but Orur's voice followed them, inescapable as thunder. But I am not without mercy. Your crops will grow again, not because of magic, but because I will show you the underground spring that lies beneath your fields. Your livestock will thrive, because I will tell you of the sweet grass that grows in the hidden meadows beyond the northern ridge. Your children will sleep peacefully, because the real nightmares will end when you learn to look at yourselves honestly. He lowered his great head until he was eye level with the village leader. The girl comes with me. She will learn to use her gifts properly, as I learned to use mine centuries ago. And you, all of you, will live with the knowledge of what you almost did. Lyanna, still pressed against the dragon's side, looked up at him with wonder rather than fear. Where will we go? She asked softly. To the mountains, Orur replied gently. Where the air is clean and the only judgment comes from oneself. You have much to learn about your abilities, young one. And I. He paused, something almost like surprise crossing his ancient features. I have much to remember about why such gifts matter. The dragon spread his wings wide, creating a canopy of storm-colored scales above them. But first, we finish what was started here. With movements that seemed impossible for such a massive creature, Orur began to reshape the clearing. His claws carved channels in the earth, directing the underground water he had sensed toward the surface. His breath, carefully controlled, cleared away the dead undergrowth and scorched earth around the stake, revealing rich soil beneath. Your spring, he told the amazed villagers, indicating the clear water that had begun to bubble up from the channels he'd carved. Your fertile ground, he added, gesturing to the cleared earth. These were always here. You needed only to look. The villagers stared in amazement as fresh water flowed freely for the first time in years. Some fell to their knees beside the new stream, cupping the clear liquid in their hands with something approaching reverence. As the first light of dawn began to touch the eastern hills, Orur prepared to depart. Lyanna climbed carefully onto his back, her small hands gripping the ridge of scales between his shoulder blades. Will they be all right? She asked, looking down at the villagers who were now busy examining their unexpected gifts of water and soil. They will be what they choose to be, Orur replied. Just as you will be. With a sound like rolling thunder, the dragon's wings caught the morning air. As they rose above the valley, Lyanna looked back one final time at the place that had nearly been her grave. Do you think they'll remember? She asked. Orur's rumbling chuckle vibrated through his chest. Oh, young Lyanna. They will remember this night until the end of their days. The question is what they will choose to do with that memory. As they soared toward the distant peaks of the Wirm spine, the ancient dragon felt something he had not experienced in centuries, hope. Not just for the gifted child he now carried, but for the possibility that even the darkest moments could become the seeds of redemption. Far below, in the valley they left behind, the villagers worked together to build channels for their new spring. And though they would indeed remember this night forever, they would also remember that sometimes, when all seems lost, salvation can come from the most unexpected places. In the years that followed, the village prospered. Children grew strong, crops flourished, and the bitter well water became a distant memory. And sometimes, on clear mountain nights, they would see a great shadow pass overhead, a reminder of the dragon and the girl who had shown them that the greatest curses come not from magic, but from the hatred in their own hearts. Lyanna grew wise in the mountain heights, learning to use her gifts to heal rather than predict sorrow. And Orur discovered that his greatest treasure was not his hoard of gold, but the trust of one small girl who had taught him that some oaths are meant to be broken, especially when breaking them means choosing love over law, mercy over justice, and hope over despair. The end.